9, 10 months of Adderall abuse and taking 300 milligrams a day, sleep deprived, and I started drinking to fall asleep.
I'm either going to kill myself unwillingly, like just by, whatever, all the crazy shit that I'm doing, or I'm going to kill myself because I can't live this way anymore. And so when I finally surrendered at 21, I had no clue that my life hadn't even begun.
Addiction is the leading cause of death in America for 50-year-old individuals and younger. And you have 112,000 people dying from overdoses, just specifically fentanyl. And 12 years on my journey when I first got into this, and even prior to that, just the lack of awareness or understanding or knowledge around the disease of addiction outside of the actual treatment providers and people that were in recovery was very limited. But I think there's just so much more that we can do. And
Absolutely.
again, is just by having conversation like we're having now and normalizing it.
So as I was saying, right when we got on this call, like I just feel like I'm at home already, right? Like the instant we connected because we're both addicts and alcoholics, it was like, "Oh, you're like my brother. This is really cool."
Right.
And we have so many things that we could talk about. I mean, we said that before on our previous call. Like, there's a thousand directions we could go in, but before we just let God take control, right? I want you to share, like, who the heck are you? What's your story? How'd you end up here? Will you give us maybe the 9-hole version?
Yeah. No, it's well, first of all, thank you very much for having me.
It's an honor.
We connected. It was special, and there's just a lot of synergy and a like-mindedness, and just a lot of the same morals and values. So it's
Yeah.
awesome to be here. But I am Jason. A lot of people know me from my history with MTV and the shows that I did on there, which was Laguna Beach and the Hills, and later you can find me on Celebrity Rehab, so you can kind of see where my career went at a young age. But I'm somebody that went through a very public battle with addiction,
Yeah.
and struggled. Even where way before I got on TV, and it's amazing because of the work I've been able to do on myself. I can actually identify and look back that I struggled with alcoholism and or the symptoms of it way before I ever picked up a drink or a drug. And I know we'll get into the into solution and recovery. But so after I went through the trials and tribulations, like I said, went to 12 different treatment centers from Florida to Hawaii, every state in between, and
12?
12 different treatment
Wow.
centers. Yeah, and it was crazy. I mean, I was 18. It was ages from 18 to 23,
Mm.
and at that time, looking back as an 18-year-old kid, being at the most impulsive and um, impressionable age, I guess. I mean, to have
Mhm.
fame thrown at you, it really threw me for a whirlwind. I always used to say I had an overinflated ego with an underestimated sense of self worth, and when you add that into it, it spiraled down quickly. But
Yeah.
and so my history was in the entertainment business, but by the grace of God, I was able to come out of that. Was able to get into recovery, was able to get into sobriety, and I really attribute that to just being really open, honest, and willing to surrender and take direction. Because the best of my decision making kept getting me back to those bad places. And so when I look back at that though, and so I had 5 years of sobriety, and then I actually had a really gnarly relapse, and that
Mm.
was due to prescription drugs, Adderall. That's a whole story within itself. I actually had no intent of abusing or relapsing. I just lost sight of my program.
Yeah.
I lost sight of what I was doing. I stopped doing everything I was doing to get myself to that spot.
Yeah.
And so I always say, for me personally, is relapse is not a part of recovery. It's actually a lack thereof.
Oh,
And
I love that because I can remember hearing that in early sobriety. Relapse is part of recovery, and in really early sobriety, I was like, "Cool, I can relapse and still be on this path." But like that was my sick alcoholic brain giving me an out. I
yeah,
don't like when people say that. I'm like, it doesn't have to be like that's not a healthy thing to say to people. I don't think.
well, no, and unfortunately, this day and age, there's a lot of people that relapse and don't come back. And
Right.
so, and for me, it's again, it's everybody's got their opinion on it, but for me, it's like I can actually look back and identify the areas that I was struggling in, and I can see clearly where I fell off course. I stopped, stop going to meetings. I stopped connecting with my sponsor on a regular basis. I stopped working with newcomers. I stopped going to church. It was just I totally could look back and see all the things that started to slowly mitigate out of my life.
Yeah.
And so, that even took me to a place where, um, you know, when I relapsed, after multiple attempts of trying to get on and off, it was when I relapsed, it was like I was on for, I'd get back on the wagon for a few months, fall back off, get back on, and I
Mm,
just wasn't really willing to get open and honest. I wasn't really, there was so much shame and stigma associated with me relapsing, but ultimately all I was doing was killing myself. And
yeah.
I mean, I found myself 3 years later on the first floor at Hoag Hospital detoxing, where my wife was giving birth to my daughter on the fourth floor. And so I
Oh,
literally went from detox up to the
wow.
fourth floor, and it was, but that's how kind of baffling and powerful this disease is. And since I
Yeah.
didn't get, I didn't actively arrest the disease, I didn't get stabilized. I went back out, probably 4 or 5 days after, and kept going, and then finally I was intervened on. Ashley got some support, and she would definitely struggle with codependency and
Yeah.
enabling, and but she finally started taking care of herself and putting herself first, and
Mm,
ultimately it landed me back into treatment. And by the grace of God, I that was the kind of the end of the show. And
yeah. Thank
again,
God.
December 17th, 2019 is my new sobriety date. So yeah, it's been a roller coaster. And I mean, look, I'm always happy to look and talk about my history, my story, and just for listeners, I mean, I think it's out there. I've talked about it a lot, but for me, like the thing I like to focus on is more on the solution, and what recovery does, and how it can really transform your life. And I think, the most beautiful thing about recovery for me was the opportunity to actually get to know myself,
Mm,
to get and see and surround myself with like-minded people, to actually embrace and understand what life's all about, and to be able to
yeah.
enjoy it. And it's so funny because people will always come up to me like, I can't believe you can't drink anymore. And I'm
Yeah.
so grateful I'm in the place that I'm like, thank God I don't have to drink anymore.
Right.
You
And I
know,
think that for people listening that are struggling with addiction, it's like, I mean, I know I was between the rock and the hard place. Like, I'm either going to kill myself unwillingly, like just by, whatever, all the crazy shit that I'm doing, or I'm going to kill myself because I can't live this way anymore. And so when I finally surrendered at 21, I thought I was surrendering to like a miserable existence for the next 60 years, and I had no clue that my life hadn't even begun. Like hadn't even begun.
right?
And I wouldn't trade it for the freaking world. And not that I wouldn't want to drink, it's not that I don't want to drink because I'm an alcoholic. I, I don't want to drink and get buzzed 5 nights a week like most of society. Like that's not living to me.
It's not, and that's like the thing is, it's so nice to be able to go out and to be able to enjoy myself, and also, know my limitations. Like your body has sensors for a reason, right? So if you're
Yeah.
happy, if you're mad, if you're glad, if you're depressed, you're angry, you're overwhelmed, like it's your body giving you signs and stuff. And I was never able to tap into that. And if
Right.
you're under the influence, or you have some mood altering substance, you're disconnecting from yourself. And for me, it's like I want to have those sensors, because then I know what to incorporate more into my life or what to
Yeah.
take away. And that's the thing. I think it's sad because I'm all for people that can enjoy themselves. I'm all like, my
Sure.
wife's a normie. She can go out and have some drinks with friends and stuff, but it does not consume her life. And more importantly, when she has a drink, it doesn't change who she is, right?
Right.
And it
Right.
doesn't become, that's the difference.
Yeah.
And so I think, with that being said, I because I think so many people out there actually really probably do struggle with alcoholism, but it's been so socially accepted, and there is,
Yeah.
so much. There's just so much that is associated with it, right? That's
Yeah.
just how people like look at having fun. They going out and doing those types of things, but it's I don't know. I just believe, like you said, it's robbing them from, one is ultimate potential connection.
Yes.
Really, it's what are you really covering up?
Yeah.
Is
And like you said, it's your potential. You're never going to live into that or live up to that. if you're numbing yourself out like that often, and I was lucky enough to get sober in Southern California. And, there was a part of me, because I thought this is like the ultimate scarlet letter. Like I'm just, screwed for the rest of my life. But then
Right.
I go to meetings and I'm like, wait a second. There's so and so and there's so and so. Like those are some really cool big names, in
Yeah.
Hollywood. And I needed that at 21 to be like, oh, you can still be cool and be sober and like, be a contributing member of society on a higher level.
Mhm.
But living in South Carolina, and I've been here for 20 years, like you don't see that. You still don't see that, I mean, you do. I was at a meeting today and there's amazing humans, but like out there in society, what the large majority of people are still just partying. Like they're doing what we did in high school and college. And I'm like, this is insane, that we're still here.
No, it is. And and hopefully, I mean, I think we are turning a corner. I
Yeah.
think that obviously, unfortunately, the reason why we're turning the corner is because addiction is the leading cause of death in America for 50-year-old individuals and younger. And you have 112,000 people dying from overdoses, just specifically fentanyl. And you just look at all the statistics out there, and it's really sad. I mean, but it's I'm just grateful that, I mean, just in the last 12 years on my journey, when I first got into this, and even prior to that, just the lack of awareness or understanding or knowledge around the disease of addiction outside of the actual treatment providers and people that were in recovery was very limited. And so I think
Yeah.
people are starting to finally get at least an understanding that there's an issue. And trust me, we have a long ways to go.
Yeah.
But I mean, because it's sad to look at it. If you look at the charts and the statistics around addiction and deaths and usage, it's only been on a steady incline with the amount of people dying, using overdoses, with a steady decline with the amount of people succeeding.
Yeah.
And it's like an opposite trajectory of
Yeah.
these two things, and it's like, what's it got to take, and now then we have COVID, you tie that in, and
Yeah.
the longest living study at Harvard is around happiness, and that's through human connection. And
Yeah.
you take, and unfortunately, it's just the tip of the spear right now of what we're seeing, because the slingshot effect of what that
Yeah.
isolation did. And I mean, we see that now. Look at all the mass shoot. I mean, just look at like all
It's
these different
crazy.
things that are coming up. And again, as I'm not a psychologist, obviously, I'm not a doctor, but I mean, if you look at a lot of this stuff and you see, it's a lot of these people are obviously, there's brain disorders. There's a lot of
Right.
things that are very, very alarming, and it's scary to look at. And I think one thing that was fascinating, I want to touch on this, is because even in like an advanced medicine, when somebody has something wrong with their heart, their kidneys, their liver, they always, whether it's CAT scan and MRI, MRI, whatever it is, they always look at the organ that has been directly affected, right?
Yeah.
And with addiction, and it's obviously centered in our brain, right between our two ears and right behind our eyes. And for the last 50, 60 years through psychology, they've always just, clustered a bunch of symptoms and, thrown medication at it. Why are
Yeah.
we not, with the knowledge and the technology that we have out there? And I know they're doing brain mapping and they are getting onto that.
Yeah.
And I mean, there's people that I've connected with that are doing phenomenal work, that are really focusing strictly on the organ itself. And I actually had a brain scan just to see what damage and stuff that I had done, and if there was stuff that was done there. But I think there's just so much more that we can do. And
Absolutely.
again, it's just by having conversation like we're having now, and normalizing it, because
Yeah.
it's not, me and you didn't wake up and we're like, oh, I can't wait for me. I can't wait to wake up and get arrested again, or destroy
Right.
a relationship, or hurt somebody, or crash a car. Like, it's and it's sad that there's so many people that still think that addiction is a choice, because there's no such thing as recreational use of heroin. There's no such thing as
Right.
recreational use of meth, or drinking 2 bottles of vodka. That there's not recreation. That's a shitty, miserable form of existence, and you're
Yeah.
trying to cope and get through the day. And until you actually have or have struggled with addiction, you'll never understand that feeling of what it's like to be in captive of.
I mean, there's no greater hell on earth. I mean, it's hell on earth, and it's so fascinating to me. I want to go back to what you said about the brain, because when you start talking about the organ, even me as a recovered alcoholic, I'm like, I was immediately thinking liver, you know, I'm
Right.
like, I'm even screwed up when it comes to like what it's affecting. But
Right.
I have studied brain health and neuroplasticity and all that stuff for years. And I see the direct, connection between like how my brain was truly wired when I was in active addiction and how I've kind of rewired that in recovery. But I want to go back, and this is kind of a tough question. It's a tough question for me to answer. So I'm curious how you would answer it because I know that there's so many people listening and they probably just heard what you said and they're like, oh, well, I'm not doing meth or heroin, so I'm good.
Yeah.
But I'm sure you get this question a lot, all those people out there. Like how do you help somebody kind of figure out like is it a problem?
Well, look, I think, you know, when I look at it, it's not even about calling somebody an alcoholic. Hey, are you an alcoholic? Or hey, you an addict? It's more like, hey, whatever it is you're struggling with, whether it's sex, drugs, alcohol, gambling, working
Yeah,
out, work, is it adding or contributing? Is it adding or let me say that again? Is it adding or subtracting from this beautiful life you have to live?
right.
And it's more of framing. Is it really? It really is it adding or taking away?
Yeah. But
And
it's so damn hard to see that when you're in addiction because we
yeah,
are master manipulators of our own psyche. It's crazy.
we are, but and I also think like when you but you also have those. I mean, at least for myself, I had there was like from 18, 19, I was in denial. Like I'm just a kid. I'm going through this, but like it was very apparent to me, like even shortly after that, that I
Yeah.
was like, dude, I mean, it's not normal to be getting arrested like I was. And even if you're not, it's just like it's being educated on it, right? Like waking up, it's not normal to be drinking at 10 o'clock in the morning, like
Right.
having these hangovers, blackouts. It's a number one, it's like a huge indicator that you struggle with alcoholism. Like,
Yeah, I thought everybody that drank had blackouts. I had
it,
no clue. No clue.
same.
I just
So
yeah.
but it's creating that conversation around it, and it's again, we can't convince anybody, right? I mean, it's
Yeah.
on them to figure that out. But what we can do is take the knowledge and the education and the science and the research that has been done and provide them with that information to make
Yeah.
that assessment or that judgment. Even like, look, there's through the program, there's a great quiz that you can take. I mean,
Yeah.
it's a pretty standard, questionnaire. And if you answer yes to any of those, I mean, you probably struggle with it.
Yeah, and I
Yeah.
remember taking that in high school and I was like, "Ugh, everyone in this room checked every box." Well, everyone in the room didn't check the freaking box,
Right.
But I thought
Yeah.
it was like this sneaky little thing. I can remember my first sponsor, and this was a wake up call for me. I remember her saying to me, "Moira, how often do you think about having a glass of milk?" And for some reason, she used a glass of milk, but it could be like I love peanut M&Ms, right? Like how often do I think about eating peanut M&Ms? Like I will, maybe once a week and I get some, but I don't sit down and eat 30 boxes of peanut M&Ms every day. Like that's the difference. Like
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
when you start to look at it that way, you're like, holy shit. Like maybe I am a little different. Maybe I am a little addicted to this. Maybe it is a problem if your world is revolving around it. I mean, every single thing I did revolved around whether there was going to be a drink there or not, you know?
That's the other thing though too is obviously addiction as a whole is the neuroscience and neuroplasticity. I mean, it's a neurological issue.
Hmm.
Um, but again, it's like alcohol as a whole, regardless. I mean, it's not good. It's poison. It affects every single organ in your body. Technically, I mean,
Yeah.
if you consume it, and again, like I want to make it very clear. I'm not against because I have family, friends that are totally.
Yeah.
It's like I'm not against people that can enjoy themselves, but there are a lot of people out there that literally their life revolves around that, and it is so consumed with it, and they're high functioning with it, and it's also when you get to the like when you're talking to those types of individuals that it's like they're highly functioning and but it's just it's being able to have the dialogue with them and really understand like 'cause there was a very um uh inspirational and somebody I looked up to. And it was funny because when this was actually when I was in early recovery back like in 2010, like when I was getting my first round before I'd relapse and stuff. And I remember kind of having the nerve to be able to ask this. He's like, it's I'm proud of you being sober and stuff like that, but I'm gonna go home and we had a long day and I'm gonna have some wine and just take the edge off. And I was literally like, why do you have to have a glass of wine to take the edge off? You
Yeah.
know what I mean? He's kind of like he kind of got frustrated because I'm like I get overwhelmed, I get frustrated, and I don't have to have a glass of wine, but that created that curiosity and created that
Yeah.
question with him. And it honestly, it transitioned, and down the road, he doesn't drink anymore.
Yeah.
But he didn't even really struggle with it. It was just more of, and it's again, it's just, it was just fascinating to have that. We just associate it with so many
Yeah.
different things.
It's just
And
the easiest thing. I can remember my mom saying to my telling me about a conversation she had with her dad, my grandfather, and she was, I think it was around smoking back then. I mean, this was decades ago. And she was like, "Well, dad, everybody has to have a vice." And his response was, why does everybody have to have a vice? Like, why is that the norm? You know?
right,
It's like if we can put healthy things in place. I mean, I can remember so vividly long into my recovery. There was one night where I like lost it on my kids.
right,
And it was one of the closest times I came to like just like, that like cat with no skin, like I'm like rage, total rage. And like give me freaking anything to take
yeah,
the edge off.
right,
And I was like, this is when I go to the drink or the drug or whatever. And like, I came home and I worked out like
yeah,
harder than I've ever worked out in my life. But I
yeah,
was like, holy crap, who am I? And I was 10, 15 years into sobriety still. But I'm like, I still have that first thought. My first thought, drink or a drug. 23 years into sobriety. It's like, what can I consume to just change my state instantaneously?
yeah.
And in recovery, it's like, okay, I'm aware of my first thought. I'm going to have a second thought and I'm going to act on that second thought, But we
And
still
it's
have it.
no, and that's the thing too, is I'm really happy you bring that up, because I think also people get misconstrued that, like, just because we're sober, everything just kind of like skates across easy. It's like, yes, we have those thoughts, and when they come through, they become more less and less. They become more and more fleeting, right? They're not there, and they're not percolating as long, especially in the beginning stages. Because
Right.
the other day I even had one. You know what I mean? It wasn't even. It was like, beer sounds good. It's just like,
Yeah.
yeah, it tastes like it's. And sometimes that's all it is, and it goes away immediately. And
Yeah.
sometimes, like, and that's where, again, with the tools and the knowledge, and just being so immersed in this, it's like I have the tools and I'm equipped if that's something that starts to become an obsession,
Yeah.
and I can actually do something about it.
And that's where connection to other recovering alcoholics comes in. It's like you got to check your thoughts and just like, what do they say? Like pain shared is half,
Right.
I
Yeah.
actually went to an AA meeting this morning and it was crazy because the second I sat in my seat, I was like, holy shit. I had a drinking dream last night. I wouldn't have remembered that I had a drinking dream
Wow.
at this stage. And if we
Wow.
don't think this isn't hardwired into our psyche somehow, I'm still having drinking dreams. I'm like,
That that's incredible. I haven't had a
yeah,
drinking dream in a long time. I'm one of the people that always ends up waking up before I use. But
yeah.
what a trip! How was that experience?
It was crazy. I mean, it was mind blowing, right? And it's always kind of this repetitive dream where I'm like, I'm in it. I'm so wasted and I'm driving and I can't see the line on the road. And it's like, how did I end up here? How did I
Yeah.
get here? But I see that as a gift from God, where God's just like, don't forget, don't
Yeah.
forget.
When I think,
And
yeah, go
go
ahead.
ahead.
No,
I
go
was
ahead.
just going to say a lot of people definitely probably wonder why the heck I still go to meetings. You're still going to meetings. And God, I'm such a better person for meetings. I always relate it to church. I'm like, well, a lot of people I know go to church. Like you sit there for an hour, it makes you feel better, it makes you ponder your life, you kind of get reconnected, you get grounded. And for me, that's absolutely what meetings are for me. You're talking about things like self-will versus God's will or all these really amazing tools that we use. It's also a reminder. I also know that, there's a slogan, there's a lot of them, but meeting makers make it. Like why would I am an addict and an alcoholic. I know if I relapse, like game over, like or game on one way or the other. Like I'm going to be using I mean, and this will probably totally floor my listeners, but like it'll be alcohol and cocaine, like bam, like right off the bat. And I wasn't a huge cocaine user. I'm just saying, I know me. If I'm going to relapse, you go all in. You go all in,
Yeah.
right? There's no in between. And so, why would I ever risk my life and my family's life? Why wouldn't I just go to a freaking meeting if that's part of like my insurance plan? Why
And
would I
we're on
not
the
do
same
that?
we're on the same page here, but I just want to ask you a question. Just
Yeah.
because there's a lot of people that there's other modalities and other forms of people of sustaining sobriety through other ways, right? And what is your take on that, or what are your thoughts? People that aren't plugged into it, specifically, let's just say AA.
Yeah. So, I mean, again, I'm not going to judge anyone's path of recovery. I'm going to applaud you if you're in recovery from addiction. That's amazing. But it's like, to each their own. I got sober in AA and it's worked for 23 years. I'm never going to risk
Right.
not, saying, I'm going to test the waters and see and, throw this out aside and try this other way. I do all these other things there. I have a spiritual life and a spiritual path and all of these other things, but I'm not willing to roll the dice on it. I mean, the best hour of my day besides this, talking to you, another alcoholic, was a meeting today, which
Right.
it's just, I mean, and a lot of times I compare it to like cancer survivors. Like if you're a cancer survivor and you walk into a room for an hour with other people who have faced down death like you did and lived the same living hell, and you connect on the freaking deepest level, that is so soul giving and soul filling. Like, why would I be like, nah, I don't really want to do that?
Well, I
you
guess,
know?
and for us, 100%. I mean, we're both products of AA. It saved our life, and it's been instrumental. But I guess I'm just talking to more people, not for us to deviate off of that. I'm saying for other individuals that are coming into this and that are more opposed to even a 12-step program.
Yeah, I can only speak from my own experience. And there's concern and worry there because I mean, I've been in this world of recovery for decades now. And the large majority, almost everybody I know that is sober, solidly sober, has done that through a 12-step program. That's the reality. And
Yeah.
there are way more that try it all these different ways and they don't make it. And I'm sure you have attended
Good
more
point.
funerals than you want to attend. I have attended way more funerals. I mean, sitting there looking at an open casket and looking at a body of a friend that died from the disease that you have. I mean, it doesn't get any harder. I lost my sister to alcoholism and
Oh
she
my God.
was 5 years sober and relapsed. Same thing. And, never would have saw it coming. And, she had too much alcohol in her system and went into a sauna for 10 minutes and never woke up. And so she wasn't, on death's door, supposedly, but like anything can happen at any time.
I'm so sorry to hear that. No, but I think and I bring that up because it's a common question from people, right? But I think going back to what you're saying is, why do we still go to meetings, or why do we do what we do? You answered it perfectly. Is why would I change what's working? Number one, but I
Yeah.
also believe that, for me, part of my routine and my program is consistency creates structure, and structure creates safety. And
Mm.
I think that's so important to have that in order, and that's just part of that process for me. And then when you go, there's a lot of things that I incorporate outside of going to meetings as well, but I think it's just that routine is so imperative. And for myself, I mean, in the morning, when I wake up, I do my morning. I do a little meditation. I pray. I do a gratitude list. Not only three things I'm grateful for, but it's not only what I'm grateful for, but why I'm grateful for them.
Mm.
And that's where a lot of the meat really resides. So I advise people that do gratitude lists not to just write what, but why,
Yeah.
because it really explains it. And then, and then I send that list off to another group of guys, and I get that in return. And but exercise is another huge,
Yeah.
huge thing for me. And again, it's like what we put into this is what we're going to get out of it, right? Is somebody that, for you, as somebody that's in health and fitness, and you go to the gym once a week, you're going to get the results of going once a week.
Right.
You do it daily, you're going to get the results of what it does when you do daily. So that's how I look at it, and I think that's kind of why, for me, is I can't deviate off of that, and I've tried that and it doesn't work. And unfortunately, the best of my decision making always gets me back to that same spot.
Yeah.
And that's where true surrender comes in, and true willingness. And again, is I'm doing what works, and
Yeah.
it's not broken. Why fix it? So
Right. Right. Absolutely. Can we talk a little bit? I don't know much about your story and relationship. I know your wife's been a huge part, right, of your recovery and you touched on it earlier. She had to kind of get help first. And
yeah,
I think that's God, it's like people just they don't get that, just because again, we aren't kind of educating America or the world enough. And I know anytime, and it happens a lot in my circles where I talk to family members that are struggling with, an alcoholic child or kid or an addict, and they really have to seek help themselves first in order to help their loved one. And
Yeah.
they just think, what do I need to do to help my loved one? It's like, you need to help yourself. That's the only thing that's going to help them.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think people need to understand is wherever there's an alcoholic or an addict, there's a codependent, and sometimes
Hmm.
they're just as sick, if not sicker. And what I mean by that is even in my early days of using with my parents, right? Is I mean, they were so enabling, and I was obviously very manipulative and conniving, and but they were throwing pillows where I should have really have fallen. And
Yeah.
they were trying to soften the blows with stuff, but ultimately they were trying to help me, but they were hurting me. They were literally
Hmm.
loving me to death.
Yeah.
And it took them to they actually had to go to a 2-week program out at Betty Ford years and years ago to really understand what they were doing. And the same thing with my wife. Like um, we met prior to me getting sober, and then we reconnected after I'd gotten sober. I had about like I think it was like 10 months, and then we started like officially dating right before my 1 year. She came to my 1 year party, and
Oh,
and so she saw me one time like completely out of it and out of control, but then later down the road, she only knew me as this guy that was sober,
yeah.
and so we just had this life that was amazing, and she just thought this was kind of who I was now, and this is how it was going to be, and lo and behold, years down the road,
Mhm.
with her, and again, as we didn't know at the time that she had untreated codependency, and she had some of her own issues that she needed to work on. But when I'd relapsed, I had her right where I wanted her, and
Yeah.
and we kept it hidden from everybody. I'm talking about Dr. Drew, all my mentors that I worked with. Like, I mean, that
Wow.
was the scariest part is when I used to drink and use. Originally, it was like I was back in the day. Used to always say I was allergic. I'd break out in handcuffs, right? Like that was
Yeah.
like the go-to thing for me. And that's really what it was. Like when I drank, it was like 9 out of 10 times something bad was gonna happen. 1 out of 10, it would be something. It would be a fun night, but it just
Right.
obviously wasn't worth it. And this time around, and it started with that prescriptions. Um, it was super easy, or super. It wasn't super easy. It was just really scary how well I was able to hide it.
Yeah.
And then after 9-10 months of Adderall abuse and taking 300 milligrams a day, sleep deprived, and also in a drug induced psychosis, I started drinking to fall asleep.
Mm.
And it was just this vicious cycle though, but I'd perfected it. It's like literally I almost say it was harder to be an addict or an alcoholic at that time than it is to be sober. I mean, just because
Yeah.
what I would do and the hoops I would jump through to just maintain and sustain and literally cut up little pieces of Adderall and have little shooters and just kind of like be able to get through each day.
Yeah.
And I was just able to, like I said, I mean, I told Ashley, I was like, you can't tell people, like I just was
Yeah.
and also it was,
And that's what you're talking about. I just want to highlight that. Like when you said that before about Ashley, like she doesn't change when she has a drink, we change.
yeah,
Like that's like where we go. We instantly become, the most manipulative. It's like it's as if something takes over your entire being. And
it's like a
it's
survival gene. I always say
yeah.
it's like a survival gene. I love the analogy you gave with the M&Ms and how we look at it. But it's like for me, as I always tell people, I think I always relate to when I was really young and you're on the soccer field and you can't, you're busting your butt and you can't wait to get those oranges and like some water, like just you're dying of thirst and that's all you
Yeah.
want. Like when you're in active addiction, that's the feeling. Like even because I was even at a place where I was sitting there drinking vodka, crying, like literally, I don't want to do
Yeah.
this anymore. But like I could not. That's how deep
Can't
my
stop.
addiction. That's how deep it was. And some people
Yeah.
can't relate to that, but for me, it was like because you just think, well, why don't you just stop drinking? It's like that connection to it. Like there was no other thought. Like it's tunnel vision. That's all
Yeah.
I want. That's all I'm going to do. And until that cycle is broken, until there's a disruption in that, I can't stop.
Yeah.
And
And
uh,
nothing else matters. I think that's the other thing people, especially loved ones, don't get, like, well, what about, what about her son? What about their spouse? Like, and I'm like, that doesn't matter. Like, when you have that tunnel vision, you don't see the children, you don't see the spouse. Like,
because
it,
because they do matter. Like that's the problem. That's the other thing too, though, is they do matter. But
yeah.
unfortunately, you are not in a place. mentally, emotionally, physically, spiritually to even process that. You just can't
Right.
come up with that. And I think that's again goes back to the neuroscience of this is when we
Yeah.
drink, our frontal cortex closes off
Yeah.
like completely. And that's like your frontal cortex is your executive operating skills. That's what helps you just with your daily decisions. I'm gonna have a glass of water. I'm gonna, I need to go take out the trash. Just all those just basic mechanics throughout the day, they get completely shut off. You lose the ability to make decisions almost literally.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Totally.
so it's like I relate that to when my daughter was born. Obviously, I loved her and Ashley, honestly, and that's goes. We want to talk about codependency. She thought if we had a kid, that would save everything.
Of course. I mean, that
Um,
I would think it would, right? I mean,
you
a
know,
rational brain, that makes sense. But
yeah,
we don't have rational brains in active addiction.
correct. And so, but looking at that, it's like I looked at my daughter, and it was I was sober the moment she was born, and went back out to the race. And it's like obviously I love and care about her more than anything, but I didn't actively arrest the disease. I wasn't stable,
Yeah.
and I was still in that like fight or flight mode, and it was it just takes over. And that's why I personally ended up having to go back to a program, and I had to go away for 30 days again, just with even with all the knowledge and the understanding and like I said, just working in the space, having phenomenal mentors, understanding the program, like um, it just took complete hold of me.
Yeah.
It really did. But unfortunately, Ashley, on her end, and no fault to herself by any means, but it's like that happening allotted her not only to do work on herself, but to really
Mm,
get an understanding that what I was doing had nothing to do with her. And
right.
unfortunately, it's like this is like one of the biggest things that I'm actually even looking at doing something in is for the people that are directly affected by the disease of addiction,
Yeah.
not the alcoholics or the addicts, because there were so many nights my wife would, I'd wake up and her head was on my chest and and I'm like, what are you doing? You know what I mean? She's like, I was just making sure your heart's still beating. Like this, these moments of,
It's harder for them because we're in a
what's
blackout, you know? I mean, in a lot of
right.
ways, it's harder for them.
But just all the trauma they experience and just the things that they see and we get to go away, right? I go away, I come back 30,
Yeah.
60, 90 days, I'm in a good mood. She's at home taking care of the kids, she's working, making sure everything at the house is in order. Just to I'm over here taking care of self, and then they just tell her to go to a meeting, and it's like, yeah, I don't know, it's phenomenal. But there's so much more, and
So
we
much
ended up
more.
going to therapy for almost 2 years every week,
Yeah.
we're in family therapy, just couples therapy, because there was just so much destruction that was done to that.
Yeah.
And again, as I'm very grateful that we have the resources and the means to do that, but a lot of people don't.
Right.
And it's an underserved population.
Yeah.
It is there's phenomenal programs that are out there that I mean, like there's one actually out here in Tennessee called Onsite, and where you can do some really deep dive therapy and get into that. But there needs to be more of them.
More.
There's
Absolutely.
not enough. And
Yeah.
so, I mean, I think it's a great topic to talk about. And I think it's really important that, people from the family, because there's a lot of, you know, re- um, remnants or residue or, that they experience from everything that we put them through.
Yeah. And so, for those people dealing with somebody in active addiction right now, I mean, I think you and I are probably on the same page, but like the best thing they can do is stop enabling, right? I mean, I had somebody say it the other day. They were like, he's just signing checks for her suicide. And I was like, oh, that's a tough pill to swallow for a father. Like he was talking about a father and a daughter. And I'm like, but it's true. It's so true. And my sister, who was 5 years older than me too, she was the oldest, right? So my parents did everything to save her, to, pay her rent and do this and just, gave her all the pillows, like you said. And they had learned a lot in Al Anon by the time I came around. And so it was like really quick. They're like, we're done. We're done. We want nothing to do with you until you have 30 days of sobriety. And this is what my mom said. She said, Moira, I don't know if that's going to be 30 days from now or 30 years from now or ever, but we're done.
Mm.
And
Wow.
I'm not saying that was like the reason I got sober, but it was a huge part of, my safety net being gone. I had nothing to fall back on, and that is so important for families of addicts to not have the safety net there all the time.
And I think what it really comes down to is having healthy boundaries. And because, oftentimes you'll see, and this is, I'll just use my own story again, is there was whoever it was, whether it was friends, wife, parents, they'd threaten me with whatever it was. And, that whatever it was I would end up doing. and the repercussions were not there. And so
Right.
basically what that told me is like, hey, you're good to keep going. And so on the outside, it's they were technically just co-signing any of the behaviors I was doing, and that just sends that wrong signal, and you're actually just contributing to the illness. And
Yeah.
so I think it's really when you get to that place and understanding, it's a got to lay out the boundaries, and whenever you lay them, you got to stick to them,
Yeah.
and you have to stand by them because unfortunately the goal people often move the goalpost
Yeah.
when the certain situation or circumstance happens, and it's tough though, because it's funny because I used to be so rigorous around different, just with sobriety, right? With hard enable, hard stopping and cutting stuff off. Used to be really against like medically assisted treatment. And I'm starting to look at these different things. So I kind of have a question for you because that's really where that's kind of where my foundation would still stand with that. But, I've run into people where they've come to me and they've actually pushed back on it in regards to like, hey, if my son was dying of cancer, I wouldn't want to just leave them alone or push them away. I would embrace them. I'd be there for them. But when they have addiction, I'm just told to just stop talking to them like your mom did, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and for me, that's what I needed at that time.
Yeah.
And it sounds like that was what was part of a contributor to your success
Yeah.
potentially. Um, but when you have these moms saying, and now being a dad, right? Like, so my
Right.
my perception is like, if because addiction sounds like it runs heavy in your family, it runs heavy
Yeah.
in my family. As much as I know and what would be there, like, and I'm not saying that I would enable,
Right.
I
Right.
think I'm very clear on that. But it's like, I guess it's just does it make any sense what I'm saying? Kind of
Yeah, no,
the
when you were
love,
talking about like, loved ones kind of having those boundaries and those consequences, because my first thought is like my alcoholic thought. I'm like, yeah, I remember it'd be like, cool, I got away with it. As soon as they didn't deliver the consequence, you felt like you won.
yeah,
It was like, awesome, I can keep going. And when you were talking about that, I was thinking about my kids. Like, we get it with a 5-year-old, like, you have to deliver the consequence or they're never going to, change their behavior. But it's so much harder when you're dealing with an adult, an alcoholic, an addict. And, I've thought about this a lot. I know you and I talked about this before. It's like there's no manual for how to raise our children who probably have genetics predisposed to alcoholism and addiction. And that's scary as all get out.
yeah,
And so, yeah, what are we going to do if this happens to our kids? And you're right. I mean, I think, and it's you can't answer that question until you're in it. You can't understand that, but I think you can love them, like you said, but not enable them. I
yeah.
think,
It's just an interesting concept, though, right? Because I mean, if you
yeah,
asked me this, you know, before July, back when I was crushing the 4 or 5 years right before I relapsed, stuff, it was like, no, cut them off.
right,
It's very black and white, and that's it. But it's now that I'm hearing this from a different side, and the mom painted it, it's just like he was dying of cancer, or like I'm watching him, he's literally nodded out, and he looks like he's dying. He might as well be dying. That's just what
yeah,
he technically is. And he's
yeah,
no way of suicide. And so it just made me just, it's just, again, it's conversation. I'm not saying there's a right or wrong. I
yeah.
think
But
statistically, when you look at the facts, like, yeah, setting boundaries and being firm, that's been what's the most proven successful. Like, I fully understand that, but it just makes you think different when you have kids
yeah,
and you put it into perspective.
absolutely. But I think, doing an intervention, being able to send them to rehab if you can do that financially, like doing those things that are going to hopefully save their life and not slowly kill them. And I think you can have conversations and express your, love for them. And I know I just walked through this with one of my best friends and a family member of hers. And it was like, I know she was having a lot of conversations. Like, I want you back. Like, talking to the addict, like they're not there. It's like their soul isn't even present anymore. And you're just so desperate to have them back. And I think sometimes, we can crack that door open and they can hear something. But I have thought a lot about like kids and like, how do I set my kids up for, their best chance? And you said something when we talked earlier that blew my mind that I'm going to touch on in a second. But one of the things I think is you said it again, like connection, right? Like when they have deep friendships that they really feel, because in society today, I mean, my kids are 12 and 14. Social media, it's all bullshit. Like it's all fake. There's no connection.
false reality.
So all of their so-called friends are super surface level, And so as parents really trying to foster like real relationships for them, I think that and I think obviously I've thought a lot about this. I think the connection piece, the faith piece, right? That they're not it. There's a higher power that's going to carry them through it, giving them that foundation. And also I can remember doing like some kind of like service mission work, when I got sober and being like, I didn't really have this in high school. Like, I think if when I was entering into my alcoholism, if my parents had been able to kind of pull me out of that world and show like get your heart filled on a super deep level through service, some of that gaping hole would have been filled. And in high school, it's just not being filled. You're filling it with alcohol, you're filling it with superficiality, with hooking up, with all that stuff. And so I think if we can do that too, I think that's really important. I remember reading a book by Laird Hamilton, Laird, right?
Of
Big
course.
wave rider. And he said that like he was the punk, kid in Hawaii and his mom took him on a mission trip when he was like 14 and he's like, my whole life was changed, you know? And so I
Yeah.
think those things are really key.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of tools, and again, is we're in the unique spot of having that, but it's again, it's just making it ultra clear is just around the people that are in it now, right? That their kids have gone to multiple treatment centers. They've done the run with them, and I'm just sharing this specifically on that because I think we're in a again, there's a lot of prevention, a lot of stuff we can do in the early stages with this, and talking about social media, it's so funny because social media is literally antisocial
Yeah.
when you really look at it, and it's a false perception, it's a false reality, and obviously you look at it and you look at the addictive tendencies, you look at the phone addictions, you look at the gaming addictions. I mean, there's a whole thing there where it really can just drive you away, and that's why on our end with our kids, like the only type of media that they get is television, and
Yeah.
outside of that, like and I'm happy that we went through the gamut with it because like it'd be so much easier just to give them an iPad or do stuff like that. But it's so nice. Like we went to dinner with the kids again tonight, and it's just so amazing that Delilah, at 5 years old, basically can sit there and have a full 3-course meal and not have to be, we'll bring crayons if she needs to color or some Play-Doh
Yeah.
and stuff. But just that connectivity and that's for us. And again, we're in a position to do that. And it's trying to set them up for success. I mean, that's why we moved. And I'm so grateful
Yeah.
for sobriety, for recovery, is because it allotted me the opportunity to make one of the biggest decisions of my entire life. Like all I knew was Laguna Beach, and I lived in LA for a handful of years, and outside of that, I didn't know anything else. But I knew that where we were and what was going on was not the most conducive for my kids. And
Yeah.
so, if I wasn't sober and I wasn't right in the right frame of mind, I would have I would never been able to just leave the city, let alone go clear across the country.
Right.
But that's what's beautiful is it's instead of being super selfish, I'm selfless now, and I put my family and my kids first. I put
It's
God,
amazing.
God, recovery, and my family, and then I'll fall in right in there. And obviously, um, it's that's the beauty of it. And so I'm just it's awesome to be in that spot today.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. I want to go back to a question from the very beginning, which I'm sure you get asked all the time. I'm sure a million people have asked me too, but 12 recovery centers,
Yeah.
right? So like everyone wants to know, especially people that have a loved one struggling, like, well, what was, and I don't think you and I actually can answer this besides like grace and surrender, but like what happened? What finally took?
Yeah. So look, I mean, the 12 treatment stints. Um, you know, I would say in definitely the beginning stages of all of that, there was a lot of appeasing. There was court orders. There was the
Yeah.
girlfriends, the family, and so it was just kind of going through the motions, right? And again, is by 2021, um, you know, I don't know that I didn't even think I wanted to stop, but I also believe that I was able to convince myself that I didn't have a problem, right?
Right.
And so again, as that kind of progressed and went on, I tried making a couple attempts, and it was really because I think looking back is the core thing to it is even when I was like knew I had a problem and I was going to treatment wanting to stop, it comes down to honesty. I was not 100% honest. I was not in full surrender. and I was not willing to take direction. I was so
Mm.
egotistical and this very self-centered, and didn't really want to, it's that's the thing. But I also think that had to do with maturity. I was young,
Yeah.
and I had a lot that was thrown at me at a young age, and just trying to process all that alone would have been enough, let alone dealing with alcoholism. And because we were on the number one show on cable for a while, and I mean
Yeah.
it's like, yeah, I was going to high school, I was going to go hopefully go play baseball and go to college, and then boom, overnight, my life completely, literally overnight, it changed.
Wow.
Everything was completely different. So keeping all that in mind, but what really changed and shifted, and with me is through my recovery journey and stuff like that, is um suicide was also became a part of it. Not just suicidal, I did, let me say it again, not suicidal, not just suicidal ideations, but actually attempting suicide.
Yeah.
And because on the outside, I had everything that society says is amazing, whether that's money, notoriety, fame, cars, girls, whatever it was. But I could never look myself in the mirror and be happy with what I saw.
Mm.
And it was just a very lonely place to be, even though on the outside it seemed like everything was great. And so, uh, by the grace of God, I was actually found when I tried taking my life, and was able to be rushed to the hospital and be revived. And, some time had passed. And again, I don't remember this 100% clearly, but I mean, I know there was after that, like I was, I think I went back into a program or whatever it was. I tried getting sober again, and I probably had 4, 5, 6 months, and relapsed again. And at that point, this is kind of the moment of clarity and where everything changed, was when I was with my mom and dad. And they were a huge part of my life, and they still are to this day. They've been instrumental and incredible parents. They just celebrated 50 years of marriage
Wow.
back in June. And so we were in a therapy session for literally like thousandth time again. So suicide attempt had happened, all the different treatments
Mm.
that had happened. And my dad, I've never seen, he's the patriarch of our family, and I've never seen him, really break down, besides when his mom had passed away. And we're in this therapy session, and he just looked across, and he's just like, "Hey, Jason," like, with a tear coming down his eyes, just like, "We don't know what to do anymore.
Mm.
Our marriage is suffering. The family is just completely up. We don't know what else to do. Mom and I lay in bed like two planks of wood, waiting for the phone call that you're dead." And like,
Mm.
for whatever reason it was, there was like this clarity. Like there was just this
Yeah.
literally like, okay, you know what I mean? And when I say that, is thank God for the upbringing and that connection, because for me, I didn't get sober for myself, because
Yeah.
and that I didn't have anything left in me. And that became my motivation. I said, "Look, I don't care about myself enough that I'll go do this for you."
Right.
And at that point, it was just kind of again, timing, God, grace. But that moment was really like that aha moment where I ended up leaving from there, and going to Florida, and going into treatment. And then from there, I left, and was able to acquire, I think it was like 45 days. And then I came back, and I actually ended up going on Celebrity Rehab, which was probably wouldn't advise people to do that, but I really went on Celebrity Rehab to change the public's, negative perception that was
Yeah.
perceived of me, because it was a real reality show, and it was an opportunity to kind of go on there and
Yeah.
show my side. And they allotted me to go on sober, and I was kind of like a background prop on the show, because I wasn't, drinking, using, or detoxing, coming off of stuff. And but that's really where that journey changed. And from
Yeah.
there, I had a lot of respect for Drew. I think the connectivity that I was able to get through Dr. Drew and some of the other people that were on that show, like a sense of relatability, allotted me the opportunity to really be in a place of surrender and to take direction. And for the first time in my life, I actually got like a real job, and had, somebody to be accountable to, and had responsibility. And I was able to establish, purpose, and really find a path for me. And I was really able to turn my mess into my message, and was able to make an impact. And at that point, I kind of disappeared from LA. I disappeared from everything for a long time, and I went and worked in the recovery community. And it
It's
was funny,
amazing.
like a year after that whole process. I mean, I was writing for the Huffington Post. I was on 2 years later. I was on a couple different boards, and it was just amazing to see how recovery really took full effect. But yeah, that's kind
Yeah.
of the long-winded version of that.
I love that. I mean, I see it as your parents, like it's the antithesis of enabling, right? Just being so real with you and like and the crazy part about that is like when you're talking about that with your parents, that was also, and I'm sure a large part of your suicidal tendencies. That for me, that came from the place of like, I can't keep putting them through this. Like, I can't live this way. I can't keep putting them through this. Like, I can't get sober. So there's no other option, you know?
I just could not see an out,
Yeah.
I mean, and it was also too, like at a young age, just the constant reminders of, you know, and look, addiction doesn't dictate who we are, but it doesn't justify our actions, right?
Right.
And, just the reminders as an 18, 19-year-old kid going through the grocery store and seeing your mug shot. Like it was just like, just all the different things that were just it's like I just couldn't get out of it, and
Yeah.
you turn on the TV and it's like, thanks to fucking TMZ, it was just like,
God, I
it's
can't
all
even
these things.
imagine.
It was just, and it was so, it was just, it just got to the point where it's like, you were ashamed to just go outside,
Yeah.
and again, but today I take full ownership and accountability and
But I
really,
also see that as such a gift for you because you had that public, persona, you were able to say, maybe I can use this for good. And I think even when you're not like even today, I'm so much more driven for what I can do for other people than what I can do for myself. Like you said, you didn't get sober for yourself. You got sober for your parents initially, but there I'm sure was this piece that just was kind of whispering to you in your soul like you're going to be able to, because of who you are, really be able to shift this. And I commend you so much for that, because you and I had the conversation of like me getting sober in California at 21, and I was like, this is like, it's cool to be sober out here. And
yeah,
then coming to the South where it was like it's still like whispered about, and I'm like, and I kind of went underground. I went to meetings and I did all that and I maintained my sobriety, but I was like, oh, this is not something you talk about. And I regret that. That's like the only regret I have in life. Like I could have been such a bigger part of that shift. And I'm so grateful to now just be, loud and proud about it. But gosh, it still can carry so much shame,
yeah,
in so many parts. So
100%.
that's amazing. Amazing. I want you to touch on one more thing before we wrap. I know we could talk for like 3 hours. I mean, we
Yeah,
could be here till
yeah,
1 o'clock in the morning, but
yeah,
you said something the last time we chatted. And I think it's so important to hear. I share this with my husband. The research, you said if somebody doesn't take a drink until they're 21 years old,
mhm,
regardless of their predisposition, I am definitely predisposed to alcoholism. I've got the genetics. I don't know if my kids do, but
right.
where did you find that? And like, where did that come from? And
So,
just share the statistic.
yeah, Dr. Hedrick, and I'll have to get it so you can actually share it with the audience. But there was a study that came out that if you do not drink or use drugs or any mood altering substance by the age of 21, you have a 90% chance of never struggling with addiction.
Wow.
And
That's
so,
amazing.
yeah, I mean, because a lot of it has to do with developmental, and
Yeah.
get into a place again, going back to the brain,
Yeah.
getting into a spot where it's at. And I think that's, again, is just another important topic is this early age use. I mean, the average age of first time use is like 11 and a half years old. It's probably even lower than that
God,
now. But you think
terrifying.
of, and we look at the drugs and stuff that we were using and you were using, and even before that, versus what it is today. It's
Oh,
like, I mean, you may never even be an addict and you use once and you're dead.
right.
But I mean, just with marijuana, look, I mean, weed that people, even when I was a kid, compared to what's out there now,
Yeah.
I mean, we're seeing kids that have people that are smoking weed that are coming in that have epilepsy. They're having seizures. They're having, I
It's
mean,
crazy.
they're literally in a drug induced psychosis for a year, and not coming out of it. And so it's just it's really really crazy to see what it's doing and the rewiring that it is into the brain. It's really scary, but yeah, that statistic is
Mm.
incredible. So I mean, if there's parents listening to this, it's and especially if the kids are susceptible to addiction. I can tell you in my household, while they're under my roof, there's zero tolerance, especially
Yeah.
for until they're 18. If I can get them there, that's a better than
Yeah.
cooking. And so that's where I'm sticking to it.
Yeah. Well, and like you said, what's out there today, I mean, it's terrifying. It's just insane. And I had this crazy experience. I used to always go in and bring a meeting into a rehab, like on the anniversary of my sister's death. It was something I always did and just wanted to keep paying that forward. And I used to sit in rooms in rehab centers where everybody would talk about their alcoholism. And it was like one year I went, and every single person in the room, nobody was talking about alcohol. Nobody was talking about cocaine. It was all this other stuff, like 100% of the room. And I was like, what the hell happened in the last few years? Like,
Right.
this is crazy,
I
you
can't even
know?
keep up with what people are using nowadays.
Yeah.
It's all the synthetics, and it's just it's crazy. I mean, there was like 5 or 6 drugs we used,
Right. I would have never, I mean, I would have never survived it. There is
No,
no chance. There is no chance I would have gone past age 20 with what they have out there today. It's
no,
insane and scary.
you and me both.
Ah, well, Jason, thank you for this time. Thank you for just all your
Cool.
knowledge and your wisdom and your just your, what you're doing in the world. I think you are contributing to the shift so much. And I mean, we just need more people out there like you. I'm just so grateful to know you and to just be able to share this podcast with everybody. Truly.
You're the best. Thank you so much. It really means a lot. I'm just grateful for all you're doing, and this was a great experience. So thank you.
Thank you.